During our travels throughout the settled systems, we encounter various factions and groups. The one human faction shrouded in the most mystery and dark unknowns with very little information on them is of course House Va'ruun. House Va'ruun is an enigmatic and widely feared group with a sizable part of its faction immediately commencing hostilities with anyone, anywhere, anytime. In this video, we'll examine the lore of House Va'ruun, who they are, what makes them tick, and exactly how they fit into the dynamics of the universe presented to us in Starfield. Now I know there are potential Elder Scrolls connections or references to some parts of House Va'ruun, but we'll save that for a different video and keep this strictly Starfield. Based on the tidbits of information we have from the interactions with Andrasia and environmental storytelling, we'll also go over various theories concerning their religion, culture, government, and society, so expect some speculation along with spoilers. I hope you enjoyed this video, as it took me days of lore hunting and editing, and if you ever want more Starfield or other game lore, you can check out my other videos, and I highly recommend visiting my partner, StarfieldWiki.net, run by the team behind UESP. Usually, things don't end well, at least for the others, when we run into Spacers, the Pirates of the Crimson Fleet, or even the ruthless Ecliptic Mercenaries. While at first glance these groups are just the baddies of the galaxy, each has their own motivations for doing what they do. The Spacers are made up of a variety of individuals who for one reason or another got into banditry. Perhaps some were disgruntled or felt abandoned by either the Freestar Collective or the United Colonies, or others were more interested in scavenging and illicit activities to get rich quickly. The demographics that make up the Crimson Fleet could be similar, though with some, a sense of loyalty to the highest earner or most powerful can permeate through to their resulting behaviors. Maybe others want to pursue the treasure of Jasper Crix. The Ecliptic Mercenaries are violent, straight-to-the-point brutes that will kill or commit atrocities against anyone for the highest bidder or for the sake of their self-interest. Above all else, in stark contrast to at least every House Va'ruun zealot we meet, the other groups can at least be negotiated with on some level at different points during our journey through the Starfield. To begin understanding House Va'ruun, their motivations, and indeed everything else in Starfield, we have to look at the history and timeline preceding our time in it. With the destruction of Earth guaranteed by the year 2203, colony ships with the newly acquired grav drive technology were carrying surviving humans throughout the rest of the unknown galaxy. This massive logistical undertaking would eventually see to the inevitable types of conflicts familiar to us from humanity's time on Earth. The Narian War that began in the year 2196 would become the first large-scale conflict in space between the United Colonies that had formed in 2159 and the younger Freestar Collective that had formed in 2188. The Narian War would last 20 years until the year 2216, which set the stage for the political divvying of these settled systems. However, barely 14 years after the end of the Narian War, at least from the perspective of the United Colonies, House Va'ruun suddenly appears in the year 2230, upsetting this fragile balance. Led by a proclaimed holy man named Janan Va'ruun, the followers of a deity referred to as the Great Serpent seem to have made their appearance amicably and formally with both the UC and FC governments. What happened in the next 10 years to ignite a bloody and exhausting 23-year conflict amongst the stars isn't elaborated upon, and we can speculate on two possible causes at this point. The first possibility is that the intention to always attack and eliminate the other factions and their peoples was always there, and that Janan Va'ruun was simply preparing and biding his time for a decade. The second possibility is that, judging by the logs in the Va'ruun embassy and Andrasia's behavior towards being disrespected, sometime in those 10 years, House Va'ruun was slighted and just got set off. Regardless of what happened in those 10 years, the Serpent's Crusade, a unilateral declaration of war by House Va'ruun on anything not House Va'ruun, set off in the year 2240. Over the next 23 years until 2263, leaving tens of thousands dead. The conflict was so devastating and perhaps incomprehensible to those who thought such a bizarre set of beliefs was worth dying for that the memory of it never faded away in the minds of countless people almost a century later, despite the colony war just being much more recent in the 24th century when we spacefarers are exploring. We can see the disgust and recoil in a few of the people we talk to, including Agi in Aquila City, when she knows that Andreja is of House Va'ruun. We don't know exactly how Jinan Va'ruun died, but assuming he was in his early adulthood when his colony ship left Earth before the year 2203, he was probably in his 70s or 80s by the year 2263, so we could say he died of old age. While we don't know the average life expectancy of future humans, we do meet one of the oldest confirmed humans we can encounter with New Homestead's 96-year-old historian, Maurice Leon. It could also be that Jinan was killed in a battle or assassinated by whoever. Once Jinan Va'ruun dies, he's succeeded by who we assume is his biological heir and son, Jarek Va'ruun, who we can guess is probably also in his 20s to 30s or so at this point, assuming Jinan sired him between his 20s and late 30s. And we're assuming that because part of the preparation Jinan could have done was to have an established heir to secure House Va'ruun's place in the galaxy in the worst case scenario before going to war, much like how some rulers in our history took or didn't take steps to such things as Alexander the Great. If our assumption is true, this would be an interesting parallel to one of the major plot points for Legends of the Galactic Heroes, where Kaiser Reinhard was continuously targeted for death in battles as a grand strategy by his enemies to destabilize his empire with infighting since he didn't have an heir. But I digress. Assuming Jarek Va'ruun was alive near the year 2330, almost 67 years after the end of the Serpent's Crusade, he would have been in his 80s to 90s. Before we move on though, we need to address the obvious schism that occurred within the House Va'ruun after the conclusion of the Serpent's Crusade. Despite Jarek Va'ruun's clear desire for peace, as he was the one who sued for peace, it's apparent that not everyone in House Va'ruun felt the same way, indicated by the Va'ruun zealots we can encounter throughout the settled systems. By the time we spacefarers are involved, we are told by multiple people that the majority of House Va'ruun abided by the peace and withdrew into isolation, though not without establishing an embassy in New Atlantis, assumingly in the 2260s. It's also made clear that House Va'ruun was brought in by the Freestar Collective and United Colonies to be a third party to the balance of powers, which is evident by the fact that House Va'ruun is a signatory in the armistice that ended the colony war that raged on between the UC and FC for 3 bloody years. Interestingly, if we read Va'ruun Ambassador Kesric Bal'mor's first log in regards to this dynamic, he says, "Yesterday marked the beginning of my tenure as House Va'ruun's ambassador in the United Colonies. I arrived full of hope, believing our gesture of opening this new embassy would demonstrate that we had moved beyond our bloodstained past. But we had barely been in New Atlantis an hour when the troubles ahead of me began to reveal themselves. Our brief walk from the spaceport to the embassy was marked by suspicious glances and sneers from numerous strangers on the street. I fear minds here will not be easily changed. The wrongdoing of House Va'ruun will not be so easily forgotten. It is my fervent wish that this embassy will come to be seen as an emblem of a peaceful future, free of the stains of prejudice and violence. I will do my utmost to act as an avatar for that goal, regardless of any resistance I may face. Though I find myself in a strange land, I know the Great Serpent will guide us to success in our endeavor." If we speculate that the embassy did open up in the 2260s and Bal'mor could have been in his late 20s or early 30s as an ambassador, he's probably also close to or in his 90s by the time we meet him. I'm willing to speculate that Bal'mor was probably in his 20s given his optimism, idealism, and a trend in which younger people generally are more open to trying new things compared to older people already set in their ways. And younger or newer members usually bring different ideas, as we can observe from the branding of Va'ruun heretical writings as being contraband in the settled systems, another indication of a potential religious schism, much like with Protestantism and Catholicism, and of course a reminder that House of Va'ruun can request to make such writings or things illegal in the settled systems as the third power despite being absent. Clearly, the makeup of House of Va'ruun is not a monolith in terms of their attitudes, beliefs, or interpretations of said beliefs. We understand this more with Andreja laughing at our question when we ask if she misses her home.
I am human. Of course it bothers me. But I have a mission. My mission helps preserve the lives and safety of my people. That is more important than my personal feelings.
And we also confirmed this with Ambassador Bal'mor's rather strong admission of the Serpent's Crusade being a wrongdoing and casting it in a negative light, referring to it as our bloodstained past. There's a key takeaway here, especially with his statement, as he is serving as the ambassador. He is clearly instructed by the ruling government of House Va'ruun and its leader, Jarek Va'ruun, to form and bolster peaceful relations with the other factions. Why Jarek sued for peace isn't known. Perhaps it was simply a result of a new theocrat, Jarek in this case, determining that the Serpent's Crusade was a misinterpretation by the previous leader, his father Jinan. Or more than likely as well, Jarek may be less fanatical and simply more pragmatic, as the Serpent's Crusade could have completely drained House Va'ruun of both resources and population. Yet we're not exactly sure as to how deep the internal schism is. Do the peaceful House Va'ruun members fight or exile the Zealots, or do both parties simply accept their differences in interpretation of how they should carry out their worship of the Great Serpent? Some of us spacefarers may look at our first meeting with Andreja and note that the people she's killing are House Va'ruun Zealots, and may argue that yes, there is clear conflict between the two internal parties, but there's two reasons as to why faction-wide conflict may not be a thing. The only people who know that Andreja is House Va'ruun are Sarah Morgan, Vlad, ourselves, her handler Thomas Arkadik, Agi, and Jada. More specifically, the only person who should know that Andreja is a House Va'ruun agent is her handler, Thomas Arkadik. So it's probably that the Zealots just don't know who she is and assume she's a dirty unbeliever and initiate hostilities. We also see Andreja has no issues killing in self-defense or really aggression, but this may have more to do with her upbringing and the intense culture of House Va'ruun, which we'll inspect later in the video. But when we are avoiding conflict with the Va'ruun early on in the game, assuming we have the Serpent's Embrace trait, we are told the following.
They speak the litanies of the promised. Let them pass. Be grateful that we observed Jinan Va'ruun's commune with the Great Serpent today. Even such a bold recitation will not save you from judgment next time.
The second biggest reason as to why there may not be a massive conflict between the Zealots and peaceful Va'ruun is that the more peaceful or isolated Va'ruun presumably still hold the current capital city of Darza on the planet Va'ruun Kai, and such a thing, maybe even the concept of a holy or vital city, probably forces the Zealots to compromise in their dealings with their more peaceful brethren. And who's not to say that the Zealots could be sending back supplies as well to their families on Va'ruun Kai, seeing as how all the Zealots we meet are constantly on the prowl as nomadic fanatics. We're basing this assumption on log number 4, where Ambassador Bal'mor mentions reaching out to his contacts back in Dazra. Andreja also confirms the existence of both Dazra and Va'ruun Kai. Where this is or what its exact coordinates are is a mystery to even Andreja herself when she tells us as a House Va'ruun infiltrator she's not given the location or coordinates of her home planet, and that the only link back home is through her handler. Lastly, in one of the many universes we can travel to where we encounter an Andreja that has killed Constellation members for the artifacts, she has Va'ruun Zealots accompanying her. It may be that the Zealots will heed the calls of the Va'ruun government if bloody or serious enough. One can also speculate that perhaps the isolationist and peaceful Va'ruun is a front, and that the Zealots are allowed to continue their work without harm coming to the more vulnerable populace of Va'ruun Kai. Fun fact about Va'ruun Kai's location is that according to StarfieldWiki.net, the datamine files from Starfield indicate Va'ruun Kai was supposed to be the planet Serpentis 4 in the Serpentis system, which explains the presence of a lot of hostile Va'ruun starships if you ever go there in the game. The files also indicate that a blank map marker exists for the Va'ruun capital city of Dazra, which is apparently supposed to be one of the major cities in the game players can explore. Andreja also elaborates she was grab-jumped by others, piloting a ship, all to keep the location of Va'ruun Kai a secret for the safety of her faction, should she be caught and interrogated by outsiders. She also says that her role of smuggler was a vital cog in sustaining the economy and population of the isolated House Va'ruun, as it seems they don't really have any formal trade relations with the other factions, or really an open trade route at all, considering their keeping of the homeworld a secret. Interestingly enough, her handler, Tomisar Clattuc, turned out to be the one who sabotaged Andreja's smuggling, which benefits Va'ruun Kai, getting her friends killed with the help of Va'ruun zealots. While we're not given an exact reason as to why he did this despite working for the supposedly peaceful Va'ruun government, his manipulation of Andreja could be further proof of internal politics and, of course, the inevitable human individuality that forms within an organization. As we conclude this part of the examination, we can surmise that more than likely there could simply just be more sub-factions, sub-houses, or parties with conflicts of interest vying for religious or political advantages within House Va'ruun that we simply don't know about. After all, they are human. As we learn slightly more about House Va'ruun's motivations on the grand scale, we notice that we don't even know the name of their religion. We do know that the followers, or at least some of them, are called the Promised, and that they are promised to be spared by the Great Serpent when it presumably consumes the entire universe and the unbelievers. It doesn't seem like, based on what she confides in us, that one can simply convert to being a member of House Va'ruun. Perhaps it's a hereditary religion, where the founding families who follow Jinan Va'ruun and their descendants are the only ones who can be participants as a result of their steadfast faith in Jinan and his revelation of the Great Serpent. We know that there are customs, rites, and prayers befitting of a religion. As we'll discuss later in the video, there is even a religious hierarchy of some sort as well. Our two sources for some of what I just mentioned are again the ambassador's second log, where he describes his morning contemplative prayer being interrupted by protesters outside of the Va'ruun embassy in New Atlantis. He also again mentions morning prayers in the seventh log, while also describing meditation. It's unclear if prayer and meditation are different things here though. It's likely that they are different things, considering that we do have a litany of the Va'ruun faith that Sarah Morgan can recite for us to avoid conflict with Va'ruun starships if we have the Serpent's Embrace trait.
O great Serpent, bless this communion that we may walk in Jinan Va'ruun's footsteps, that he jumped from the Sol system out into the beyond and touched your magnificence, that he learned the truth of the shrouding, the coming eternal embrace, that you will reward the promised and cast the accursed into shadow.
As shown by the words in the litany, it's clear that Jinan Va'ruun is still revered as the founder and an exemplar model all Va'ruun members should follow, including his more violent side. This belief is shown by a data slate as well we can acquire from a Va'ruun zealot.
Brothers and sisters, now is the time. We must spread the word of the Great Serpent across the settled systems. We must speak, and if the unbelievers refuse to listen, then they will be purged. We must go to their places, where they are, where they were, where they will be. We must pave the galaxy with scales, and all who stand before us will fall.
But back to the name of the religion, the trait Serpent's Embrace probably isn't indicative of the Va'ruun religion name, as Raised Enlightened or Raised Universal, in regards to the two other popular religions or spiritualities during this time, are not their respective names, as the Enlightened aren't really a religion, they're more of an atheistic humanitarian organization, and terms like House of the Enlightened refers to a dwelling of theirs rather than the whole set of beliefs. Sanctum Universum is also kind of a name for the organization and not exactly the set of beliefs. These three religions may just simply not have names, like in our reality, how Buddhism may describe the belief of Buddhists, or how Islam describes the beliefs of Muslims, and so on. Just as likely of a possibility is that House Va'ruun members don't even have a name for their religion, as they may find the naming of their collection of beliefs unnecessary, as naming something is to distinguish or differentiate it from other things. In the worldview of House Va'ruun, there is no other truth but the truth of the Great Serpent and Jinan Va'ruun's prophetic revelations. We know this due to some of the dialogue with Andreja, where she says she knows what's coming when we enter a relationship with her. She fears for our existence, our soul, if you will, once the Great Serpent returns, because in her mind, she has accepted the truth of the Va'ruun religion, and the truth is that the universe will end one day, and the ones who don't believe or weren't of the House of Va'ruun will be cast in the shadow of the Great Serpent or consumed or what have you. So why give a name to that truth?
When the Great Serpent returns, I know I will be by his side as one of the promised. But you are not like me. You are not House Va'ruun. Your fate, as much as it pains me, is sealed. I have tried to not worry myself over it, but I cannot stop thinking about it. What future can we have if that is the inevitable end?
In one of the many universes we can visit after passing through the Unity, there is a universe in which we meet a hostile Andreja. It turns out that she killed every member of Constellation except us. There's a lot to analyze here. She uses the term penitent, which is also a word used by a Dr. Baines on Star Station RE939, who we'll actually talk about later. Penitent as a person can be defined as someone who is seeking to repent their wrongdoings or sins, so in this case, anyone who is not of House Va'ruun is a sinner, and how to repent seems to basically be, oh well, guess I'll die. Another term, unbeliever, seems to also be a general term for anyone who is not part of House Va'ruun as well. If you happen to have the Serpent's Embrace trait in Starfield, you don't have to fight and kill Andreja and her cohort, as you have access to a dialogue option that says, I await the shrouding, sister. Lay down your arms. Here we get another term that we have often heard from enraged Va'ruun zealots shouting at us as they charge towards us in our adventures. Shrouding. It's a term that's used by zealots as a substitute word for death or end. It's also used in part for the House Va'ruun capital ships, the Shroud Bearers, we can find in Starfield, giving more of a religious significance to the term. And in the context of the conversation with Andreja as a fellow Va'ruun member, the shrouding refers to the end of existence, as we know it in a sort of comforting way akin to how someone shrouds you or blankets you cozily. This is also referred to in the same litany that we had Sarah Morgan recite earlier. In response to our statement, Andreja replies,
So, there's more to you than my vision led me to believe. I apologize. Here, take the artifacts and Constellation's data. As one of the promised, they are yours by right.
After determining we are one of the promised, Andreja again mentions that the Great Serpent somehow communicated to her about the last Constellation member, or that she received a vision about us from the Great Serpent or some source, perhaps the High Council, notified her of our existence. This information is incredibly interesting as it points to some theories we'll speculate on here shortly. One really important detail too is that this is another rare instance in which we can interact or talk with House Va'ruun zealots without them trying to kill us. And in their dialogue, they say,
Scholar, what do you want? We have nothing to discuss.
What is the title of caller? It's a completely different term compared to promised. Promised implies that we are the ones who are waiting for something, while caller implies a more active role in summoning something or someone. Or it can even mean someone who visits someone or somewhere. Now, before you start getting too excited, it's highly doubtful that the Zealots or Andreja would know of us being a powerful Starborn, considering they're quite eager to engage with us and only refer to us as a member of Constellation, at least initially. This Andreja we meet took action against Constellation when she discovered the existence of the artifacts and refers to their existence as blasphemy. She reported the discovery of the artifacts to the higher-ups, and the decision was made to seize them no matter what. But this is the confusing part. When she learns we are of House Va'ruun and a promised one, she willingly gives us these artifacts, saying that as one of the promised, they are ours by right. This opens up so many questions. Does this mean then that the term promised isn't just a general term for any House Va'ruun member? Or could this be a difference between the starting universe and this universe where things aren't given the same nomenclature for the same reasons? And if in this universe with Fanatic Andreja, We have a right to the artifacts as a special promise. Does this mean that House Va'ruun vaguely knows about the Unity, the Armillary, and the multiverse? Or does this simply mean that we are entitled to it as loot since we are promised? It's all very ambiguous, and this is where we just have to speculate, and before we do, let's do a little bit more digging on the background of the religion. We can actually talk to Mir'za, who's being held prisoner by the United Colonies in New Atlantis, and if we still have the Serpent's Embrace trait, she tells us the following.
I have nothing to say. I am a prisoner, trapped by a weak people who do not kill their enemies when they should. The Great Serpent called me to fight the unbelievers in the United Colonies. But I was ambushed, and my ship disabled. Now, I am here. Oh, you follow the path? You are in a strange land, full of lies and ignorance. You must hold true. Otherwise, when the Great Serpent returns, you most certainly will perish. Lies! Lies! They seek to mislead and confound the faithful. I know, like you must truly know, deep down, that the Great Serpent's rise is inevitable. There will be no place for those who turn their back on this. You must excise this doubt, for your sake.
Her statements belie a rather merciless attitude towards prisoners, but also similarly to evil Andraja's statements about the promised, ambiguously denote the importance of that status or term, even giving us something. The Serpent's Embrace trait itself is really interesting because apart from the rare dialogue options, the Serpent's Embrace trait also gives us a 25-point bonus to our health and oxygen levels every 4 hours after we grab jump. But if we don't grab jump, our health and oxygen actually suffer. This is sort of a dark parallel to the Sanctum Universum, where many of its believers think that a deistic god is waiting for humanity somewhere out there in the universe to reach it, so they grab jump to get closer to their concept of God.
Do you not feel him when you pass between the stars? You surely must.
Making another run out of New Atlantis, taking universals out in the stars. To get closer to God and to appreciate the galaxy and all its majesty. Have you ever felt something spiritual while traveling the stars? I've jumped dozens of times, and I still don't know I've had the revelation that Keeper Aquilus describes. But I'll keep jumping.
Now, the person in charge of the Sanctum Universum is Keeper Aquilus in our backyard of the multiverse, and he is the Pilgrim Starborn who has gone through the Unity many times, and the way you get to the Unity is by grab jumping with the Armillary on board. So the fact that House Va'ruun's cherishing of grab jumps as a big part of their religion or way of life being so close to the beliefs of the Pilgrim Sanctum Universum is just way too coincidental. We know at one point as well that Jinan Va'ruun had contact with Aquilus, also known as the Pilgrim, at least in our starting universe. Mir'za tells us of an epic duel between Aquilus and Jinan on a planet.
Jinan Va'ruun meets the unbeliever. He gives false prophecy to Jinan. But such is Jinan's conviction in the Great Serpent, he does not hesitate. He cuts the unbeliever down. But the unbeliever returns. Jinan realizes the Great Serpent is testing him, and he will not be found wanting. 4 times they fight. Over 120 rotations of the planet they are on. Remember these 4 battles, Jinan, the unbeliever says. Remember these 120 rotations. But Jinan knows this is blasphemy, and delivers the killing blow. That is all.
This fight may or may not have happened and was simply a way for Aquilus to leave a trail of breadcrumbs for others who caught wind of the existence of the Unity, or the center of the multiverse in existence as we know it. However, I lean towards the fight having actually occurred, especially with Mir'za's description of the fight where Jinan Varun struck down the Unbeliever multiple times, alluding to the Starborn ability to duplicate or summon parallel selves, as we spacefarers can, assuming we become Starborn. So it may just be that Jinan Varun incorporated his experience with the Starborn into the doctrine of the Great Serpent, which is somewhat credible considering our speculation about Evil Andrea's dialogue. Now, buckle up here because I want to talk about some theories that I have as far as Jinan Varun and this Great Serpent go. First, we have Jinan Varun and his followers grab jump multiple times on their colony ship. During this time, it's insinuated that Jinan lost time during the journey, while others didn't. There is one eerily similar case to Jinan's story, and that's a story we've explored in another lore video covering the catastrophic ending of Earth. We discover from Victor I's final message that he too lost time after he touched an artifact uncovered on Mars, which led to 12 days of lost time for him. My prevailing theory on this part of Victor's story is that once he touched an artifact, he was marked, which means that he could be summoned as a parallel self by another Victor Isa in a completely different universe with a completely different timeline for 12 days, during which he was given the calculations needed to develop the grav drives at the cost of Earth. This theory is backed up by Barrett being the only other Constellation member gaining Starborn powers, specifically Parallel Self, where he can summon another Barrett from the infinite pool of Barretts, and presumably that Barrett also touched an artifact just like our original Barrett. So if Jinan lost time, somehow he may have come into contact with an artifact which marked him, and the one living being that happened to summon Jinan instead of another Jinan was an extra-dimensional being he dubs the Great Serpent, which apparently proclaims that it was the original creator of the universe as we know it, and that it will return sometime in the future to wreak devastation and sparing only the believers. So, let's focus on the Great Serpent now. The Great Serpent could be one of four things. First, the Great Serpent may actually be an extra-dimensional being that resembles a colossal serpent of some sort, and could be linked to the group of beings that the Unity refers to as the Creators, beings who are responsible for the placement of the temples and artifacts we can come across in the multiverse, and that we may even get to meet them later on. Second, the Great Serpent could just be another Starborn, a different Jinan Varun, who is immensely powerful and made a grand showing to impress upon the other Jinan Varuns in following his ways. This may be why there's a remarkable similarity in the valuing of grab jumps between the Sanctum Universum and House of Varun. Third, the Great Serpent could actually be a different version of the Unity. All of these theories could be credible considering it's said in-game the only person who's seen the visage of the Great Serpent was Jinan Varun himself, so we don't necessarily even know that it's actually a serpentine being, and the name could just be symbolic. While I lean most towards the first theory, I think the third theory can work as well considering the Unity's statements and other lore bits we can pick up on that explain to us that existence is literally infinite. To summarize, everything can and can't be everything at the same time in a matter of non-linear time. So it wouldn't be a stretch that this fact of existence applies to the Unity as well, which we can hold to be a gateway or a center of the infinite multiverse. The Great Serpent may just simply be a different version of the Unity, considering the Unity itself is existence or is part of existence, but just a more involved or malevolent one. However, it wouldn't explain how Jinan Varun could have gone to a Unity without possessing an armillary from our starting universe at the very least, which then leads to another wild but shaky theory that Jinan Varun and the colony ship he was on came from a different universe, which is a bit overwhelming to think about. However, it's also been said by the Bethesda writers in a lore Q&A that the colony ship Jinan was on made multiple grab jumps, so maybe there was a chance of causing some sort of anomaly in some way. For both the first or second theory, let's quickly examine the symbolism of the serpent and of course the circular mark of House Varun that feature prominently in graffiti, decor, and decal with the lens of human religion and culture. Humanity, since we could pass down stories orally, has attributed a wide array of symbolic and spiritual meanings to snakes or serpents. Across multiple cultures, the serpent can mean death, evil, anger, deceit, rebirth, fertility, renewal, wisdom, and yes, unity. In particular, the Ouroboros, sometimes depicted as a snake biting its tail, in a Gnostic definition can represent the unity of the spirit and the material, and of course the center of the multiverse is called Unity in Starfield. On a personal side note, while the circular symbol of House Va'ruun does resemble that of an Ouroboros, the very first thing I thought of even before the Ouroboros was the Enso, a meditative and deliberate painting one undertakes in Japanese Zen Buddhism that produces the form of a complete or incomplete circle. While the Enso for some can symbolize void awareness, the concept of infinity or the universe, I don't think it's a good fit for our current interpretations of House Va'ruun, as the Enso can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. Now, as you may have noticed, I didn't mention the fourth and last theory I have about what the Great Serpent is, and I'll actually bring it up once we start exploring the technology and horticulture of House Va'ruun later in this video. When we discover that Andreja is a clandestine agent for House Va'ruun, or as she calls it, her family, we can learn a bit more about what life is like as a member of the non-zealot House Va'ruun. Needless to say, based on its policy of self-reliance and dependence on smuggling work by agents like Andreja, House Va'ruun has a very Spartan lifestyle in which the children are immediately indoctrinated into not only the Va'ruun religion, but the way of life to accommodate the religion. It seems that even the concept of dating couples, or something that we're more familiar with in our own reality, is a bit foreign to Andreja, as she doesn't know exactly what to call it, or at least equate to in her Va'ruun culture, which is fascinating. As we romance and eventually win her heart in marriage, Andreja wants to have a very private moment with just the two of us, in which she gives us a rather interesting looking dagger.
You hold in your hands the most treasured item I could give you. I would hope you recognize a dagger when you see one. I know. This requires some explanation. In my culture, every child is entrusted with a pet groat. They are domesticated creatures native to my planet. Smelly, cantankerous, but their milk is a staple of our diet. We raise the groat. We care for it, we milk it. And when we come of age, we slaughter the groat and fashion its skull into a dagger. It is a lesson. Through this groat, we are shown the connection that we have to the Great Serpent. That all things serve the Serpent, and can be tools for his use, in more ways than one. Yes, but it is very effective. Every member of House Va'ruun has a dagger like this. We are instructed to keep them at our side at all times. The Great Serpent is always with us, as is the danger of those who defy and oppose him. But that constant connection to the Great Serpent is a liability to those of us sent out into the settled systems. So when we first leave our home, we hide it.
Based on what Andreja says, the creatures called groats are one of the main livestock creatures of House Va'ruun that can serve as not just resource production, but sentimental pets, much like how chickens or other animals can be for some people in our reality. Killing a pet you've raised since you were a child is pretty hardcore, and the intent behind this ritualistic culmination is clear in both obvious and subtle ways. Apart from teaching the children to value and be resourceful with the things or worlds granted by the Great Serpent, it teaches them to not forge too close of a connection to certain things, or in the more extreme case, dehumanized individuals, such as the so-called accursed people or penitents of the settled systems who are not House Va'ruun. The act teaches obedience to the elders, adults, and systems that raised them. Respect is also a huge thing. Andreja was seriously ready to kill the pub owner, Agi, in the middle of Aquila City, where the Freestar Rangers are headquartered, when she was disrespected after extending an offer of help. Grave insults are not taken lightly at all, and it's not hard to imagine duels being a frequent event in the Va'ruun capital of Dazra over perceived insults. Even light insults are taken rather seriously, as shown by Ambassador Bal'mor's log number 4, where he recounts a terrible state dinner gone wrong with a high-ranking Va'ruun priestess in New Atlantis. Great Serpent, is this a test of my faith? Do you truly wish to plumb the depths of my loyalty? What other explanation could merit why you would permit such a spectacular disaster? Dinner at Deputy Roland's was initially promising, even congenial. Yes, there were pointed questions about House Va'ruun's intentions, but overall, an air of polite decorum was maintained. But it was when one of Roland's more boisterous guests, an officer of some type, perhaps having enjoyed one too many glasses of Chandra, asked, "But how can we trust you snakes after what you did?" That I believe the gravid reached a breaking point. There were only words, but words are the battlefield on which diplomacy is fought. And I realized too late that this was a salvo Saya would not let pass. As dessert was served, Saya excused herself. We waited for her return, and waited, and waited. When it had become clear the gravid had simply left, I made my pleasantries and rushed back to the embassy. There, I found her packing her things. When I asked where she was going, she stated simply, "I have seen all I need to," and she left without another word. Now, it may or may not be just Andreja's personality, but we could also assume that almsgiving or charity is looked upon favorably in House Va'ruun society, as whenever we donate credits for a scholarship or helping a single mother out, Andreja really likes that. However, I have my doubts about this for two reasons. First, it doesn't feel like House Va'ruun society tolerates the needy or weak based on Andreja's description of her life back on Va'ruun Kai. Again, the lifestyle and the creeds of Va'ruun society seem to lean towards self-reliance, understanding how your and other beings' place in the universe works, and so forth. We also find out something interesting after we get to the Unity, assuming we married Andreja in the universe we're leaving.
Lover Andreja eventually chooses to be reborn herself. Your commitment to each other bolsters all relationships in the settled systems. Marriages blossom, more people in House Va'ruun begin to question its orthodoxy and look to the outside world.
This revelation by the Unity shows us that not just the Zealots, but also House Va'ruun overall as a faction is extremely wary of outsiders. So when we're giving 20,000 credits to some student or a struggling mother, these total strangers, it may just be Andreja's personality. Now obviously compassion isn't totally absent in House Va'ruun individuals, because again, we can look at the patience and empathy exhibited by Ambassador Bal'mor when he's dealing with the protesters outside of the embassy. We're just speculating on the societal attitude towards certain subjects or groups, which, as we all know from our own reality, is completely different from the perspectives and values you or I hold at an individual level. Lastly, for this part of the lore, we should look at the snake art and culture of House Va'ruun.
Tunnel snakes rule. We're the tunnel snakes. That's us. And we rule. Tunnel snakes rule.
No, I don't mean those snakes, but anyway, this part you may have to take with a little grain of salt, as I couldn't get the House Va'ruun Embassy artifact info kiosk to work for me in-game, but according to StarfieldWiki.net, it's in the game files and the kiosk reads, "Welcome. Displayed here are works created by Va'ruun artisans, personally selected by our magnanimous leader, Anaska Va'ruun, to exhibit one of the many facets of Va'ruun culture. It is his sincere hope that through the shared appreciation of art, our societies may better relate in these portentous times. Coil 1 and Coil 2, the Coil series of sculptures by renowned artist Deran Malin, are an attempt to explore the spirit of the Great Serpent. While his visage is unknowable to all but Jinan Va'ruun, the only man to have beheld his grandeur, we may still endeavor to imagine that moment. The hooded bust, while the snakes of old Earth can in no way be compared to the immeasurable power of the Great Serpent, they serve as a starting point for many aspiring artists in Dazra. This traditional piece was created by a second-year student who has gone on to be a proud contributor to the legacy of House Va'ruun. The Spire. Here, Deran Malin calls to mind the majesty of the Scaled Citadel, the home of our great leader, Anaska Va'ruun, as well as the resting place of our founder, Jinan Va'ruun. The High Council of House Va'ruun has guided us since its creation from high, within this mighty structure. Morning, the flagship of House Va'ruun and the first vessel used to make contact with the settled systems, was decommissioned in 2299. This piece of its hull is a symbol of the great works House Va'ruun has achieved in its time. Note, returned to Dazra by direct order of Anasco Va'ruun. There's a lot of potential lore here we can examine, so let's break this down. First, there's a huge emphasis on art and artists in the Va'ruun culture. Even a prominent Va'ruun artist is named by the name of Durad Malin, who sculpted the Coil 1 and 2 series that represented the spirit of the Great Serpent. We also get a description for the hooded bust that was made by a student, indicating a formal education system under House Va'ruun. Just from this little information, we can infer that House Va'ruun isn't just about the strong eating the weak, but is all about placing value on art, education, and probably other forms of culture as well, such as written literature, which is backed up by when we look at contraband Va'ruun heretical writings. It wouldn't be surprising if music and food were also even more different from the rest of the settled systems, as I highly doubt Chunks has a branch set up somewhere on Va'ruun Kai. Second, we get more lore about the Va'ruun capital city of Dazra on the planet of Va'ruun Kai. It appears just like the mass building in New Atlantis, or Benjamin Bayou's precious trade tower on Neon. There is a physical center of administrative power in the form of the Scaled Citadel, where it houses the corpse of Jinan Va'ruun, a ruling body called the High Council, and the current Va'ruun leader. Speaking of the current Va'ruun leader, surprise, it's not the second leader, Jarek Va'ruun, which is unsurprising, and we'll talk more about this when we examine the government system of House Va'ruun. The third and current leader as of the year 2330 seems to be Jinan's grandchild, Anasco Va'ruun. We don't know if Anasco is the only child or what, so we can assume Anasco's age to be anywhere between 30 to 60 based on our earlier speculation about Jarek Va'ruun's age when Jinan died. The mentioning of Anasco Va'ruun as the current great leader is going to be something we have to take into account when we talk about the government of House Va'ruun later in the video. The last piece of lore we can point out here is that the original flagship of House Va'ruun, called the Morning, that made contact with the settled systems 100 years ago in the year 2230, was decommissioned 69 years after in the year 2299. Curiously, the piece of the Morning's hull on display in the Va'ruun embassy has been returned back to Va'ruun Kai by the order of Anasco Va'ruun. This could mean that they are set on rebuilding the ship, or consider the piece a holy relic, or perhaps they are low on resources. Anything is up for debate. House Va'ruun seems to have their own arsenal of technology that's quite distinct from the rest of the settled systems in both power and design. While some of their ship models have named manufactured parts such as Shroud Eklund, the others seem to have more custom-made parts such as the capital ships called Shroud Bearers. The names of the ships are also quite interesting as they further emphasize the religious aspects of House Va'ruun. We have Dirge, Hymn, Litany, Eulogy, Vigil, Prophecy, and Revelation, from the lowest tier to the highest class of ships. Technologically speaking, just a few of these Va'ruun ships are quite powerful, and seem to win often against Freestar Collective or United Colonies patrols when we can observe such fights. House Va'ruun's spacesuits and attire seem very geared for practicality and, of course, combat. We're not sure how much more advanced the spacesuits of House Va'ruun are compared to UC or FC or even Ecliptic armor, but given how difficult Zealots can be to kill, and how a few more Zealots in a pack seem to favor melee combat, the suits must be considerably sturdy and reinforced, as the Va'ruun place great emphasis on warfare. This conclusion can be backed up by the information on House Va'ruun weapons we can find and use them ourselves in Starfield. We have the Va'ruun Painblade, which is one of the best melee weapons in the game, that speaks to a superior craftsmanship behind it compared to other faction melee weapons. A Va'ruun Starsharp Particle Beam handgun is also an incredibly powerful weapon that somehow deals both physical and energy damage. Finally, we have the Va'ruun Inflictor, which again is an incredibly powerful weapon compared to many of the weapons we spacefarers can come across in the game with its particle beams. Now, I'm lumping House Va'ruun's horticultural practices in with their technology because this relates to their medical care and also my fourth theory about what the Great Serpent could be. And this got me thinking, because what exactly are the artifacts made of? We know from Judith Tatian's recordings from NASA that when she was brought on as a metallurgical expert for the examination of the artifact from Mars, she had absolutely no idea, and even comments that the established periodic table of elements has completely been flipped upside down. Even scientists in the 24th century, when we go to the Nishina research station on Freya 3, have no clue as to what the artifact is, or how it's producing gravitational and dimensional anomalies. We also know that the artifacts are basically weightless when we examine them in our inventory. But what if they're looking in the wrong places? Enter the Venom Tree. The Venom Tree is really interesting, especially when we look at the lore behind Star Station RE-939. When we first touched down on New Atlantis, we were greeted by an incompetent manager and civilians who had barely escaped House Va'ruun zealots, and we head on over there to find a massacre with Va'ruun zealots still lingering around. After cleaning up, we looked through some concerning logs. Determine if a human can survive ingestion and extraction from species CV82. The experiment will measure levels of common digestive enzymes, lingual and gastric lipase, pancreatic amylase, and measure acidity levels over extended durations. Post-experimental vivisection will analyze enzyme secretion and gland structures in the stomach, pancreas, and small intestine of CV82. Based on patient records and anecdotal evidence, it is hypothesized that consumption by species CV82 is survivable due to the slow-acting digestive system and reliance on salivary amylase that is unable to penetrate common fabrics. Experiment does not account for an absence of clothing materials during the ingestion. Dummy subjects in full spacesuits experience zero degradation of the exterior fabric from gastric and lingual lipases. However, pancreatic peptidases show damage after 14 hours. Survivability is estimated at a maximum of 16 hours. A different log titled VP-0184 Abuse by Dr. Fernando Pina refers to these concerning scientific proposals, saying, "Hey guys, not to be a worrywart, but I am slightly concerned about the psychoactive properties of species VP-0184 and the potential for involuntary abuse. I'm no snitch, but I've noticed a couple of really bizarre proposals as of late, including this one about xenodigestion. Not to call anyone out, but who cares how long a person can survive in some side predator's stomach? This isn't the best use of mass resource, guys. I'm sure Ricardo would agree." A response to Pina's message by an anonymous user replies, "This might be a coincidence, but the day after we discovered the psychoactive properties of that particular flora, Dr. Baines has described this incredibly bizarre dream about being devoured by a snake. But you know how private he is about his research. I didn't push the issue because it's none of my business, and because honestly, Dr. Baines scares me." So let's break all of this down. It seems after Dr. Baines interacted with the Venom Tree in experiments, he called someone a penitent, which is a term used frequently by House Va'ruun members, and presumably, he was the one who came up with the bizarre experiment in which how long a person in a specially made suit could live for inside the digestive system of a living creature, veering far away from the original cancer research they were doing on the Star Station. We have a couple possibilities in regard to Dr. Baines. Some might think he was a House Va'ruun infiltrator, but he does have a child, a son, on board the Star Station by the name of Michael Baines, so it makes that possibility a lot less likely. Another possibility is that he may have accidentally communed somehow with the Great Serpent through the Venom Tree, which would explain the significance of it being present in the Va'ruun embassy. It could explain in theory how Jinan may have communed with the Great Serpent without artifacts, perhaps after picking up a sample of the Venom Tree from one of many planets that Jinan's colony ship, checked out the consumption or interaction with the sap of the Venom Tree during a grab jump could have allowed this communication. Now, I keep bringing the sap of the Venom Tree up as the analysis of this Venom Tree, or VP-0814, indicates that there could be potential medicinal and other beneficial applications of its roots. However, the leaves possess psychoactive properties if lit, meaning that it can alter your brain chemically in terms of behavior, cognition, and mood, but nothing is said about the sap. Ambassador Bal'mor actually almost goes into detail about the Venom Tree's sap after he talks about the harmless spores, but then hesitates and changes his mind. We can speculate that the sap may simply be poisonous, indicated by our question of if the tree is dangerous, but if it is, Why not just say so, or even say that the venom tree is entirely harmless? It's more than possible that the name of the venom tree is just a misnomer and is a symbolic name that represents a connection of this flora to venomous snakes, or specifically the Great Serpent in House Va'ruun's religion. The sap could serve a strictly religious purpose close to the secrets of House Va'ruun, such as communing with the Great Serpent, which may have been what Dr. Baines did by accident, and may have marked him as House Va'ruun to be whisked away, which might explain his disappearance as we can't find his corpse on the star station. And this is where the artifacts, or a part of the properties of the artifacts, come into play. Could it be that the sap of the venom tree, containing unknown metals, was one of the ingredients in the creation of the artifacts by the creators? Before you laugh, this isn't too far-fetched. Back in 2020, the New York Times covered the field of phytomining, which is a process where you can extract metals from hyperaccumulator plants that evolved to absorb an incredibly high amount of metals. And if we look at the venom trees that have taken over the Va'ruun embassy in New Atlantis, they even grow all over and through metallic surfaces. It isn't too far-fetched to consider the possibility of the venom trees on some planet or even Va'ruun Kai absorbing a special metal to give it particular properties that can be harvested. And this is where my fourth theory on the Great Serpent comes in. It just could be that the venom tree sap induces somehow similar hallucinations across multiple humans of a Great Serpent-like being. When we look at usage cases of dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, we can note that a lot of people's experiences in their visual trips can be strikingly similar to one another, so it's possible some things can be similar, tripping on the leaves or sap. But assuming we are right about the venom tree's sap in regards to its metallic properties, the greater link here may not be to an actual being that exists on a different dimensional plane, but it could be to the pieces of the armillary, the artifacts. When we look at the symbol of House Va'ruun, it looks like it could be a visual representation of the armillaries we encounter in temples or when we construct them. And when we look at the name of the next DLC, Shattered Space, we could do a far reach here and think that the armillaries were once whole and were shattered into these multiple artifact pieces. This theory could be linked back to what we were discussing earlier in the video about how the importance of grab jumps is similar in both House Va'ruun and the Sanctum Universum. But yeah, again, lots of fun speculation here, so let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If we had to sum up the system of government for House Va'ruun, it would be a theocracy in which a religious leader or religious leaders are given authority over everybody else by a divine mandate. Of course, it's not as simple as that definition when it comes to the story of various societies, and it's definitely not as simple for House Va'ruun in this case. We do have some big clues presented throughout the video and what I'm going to cover here shortly as to how the House Va'ruun government is structured. And again, I am going to speculate here based on what we've covered and a bit of human history that deals with caliphates, empires, and kingdoms that the Bethesda writers seem to have been inspired by. For the final time, let's go over some of Ambassador Bal'mor's logs again. In log number 3, a high-ranking priestess by the name of Saya Mavan is mentioned, specifically with the title of Gravid. A gravid is an interesting word to use here as it comes from the Latin word gravis and is usually referred to people who are pregnant or carrying eggs or children. We're not sure if actual pregnancy distinguishes a high priestess even more, but we could definitely take it as a symbolic rank rather than a literal one, with which they may have looked at as a maternal figure with a bit more authority. In log number 5, all House Va'ruun are ordered to return to Dazra with just a single word: return. No explanation is given apart from this one word. When this message was sent, I strongly believe it was at this point Jarek Va'ruun died and deliberation on the matter of his successor started in the capital city of Dazra. This could be akin to how Kurultais requiring attendance were called by Mongol chieftains to discuss matters of great importance, or when the Mongols purportedly retreated from Europe upon allegedly receiving the news of the death of Ogedai Khan. I also strongly think that only this one word was sent, as the leaders of House Va'ruun may not have wanted a message detailing the death of their leader intercepted by the other factions, so their period of mourning or weakness could be exploited. Log number 6 kind of backs up our theory here when Ambassador Bal'mor speculates that it couldn't have been the offended gravid priestess Mavan who convinced the leaders to abandon the peace efforts, and that it must have been some larger event that prompted the order of return. Interestingly, a court is mentioned here, which may be separate from the High Council that's mentioned by Andreja and Tomisar Clattuc. Log number 8 is when I believe Anasco Va'ruun seized legitimacy and authority as the third theocratic leader of House Va'ruun, upon which he ordered a message be sent to Ambassador Bal'mor requesting information about the outside world. It's at this point we're not sure why Anasco Va'ruun would have requested said information, but more than likely it has to do with whatever decision they need to make about House Va'ruun's next move in the settled systems. Now I'm going to draw 3 beautiful charts for you to represent my theories on the structure of government for House Va'ruun, knowing what we know. The first chart shows the government of House Va'ruun may have started out as Jinan Va'ruun, as the sole power holder, the sole decision maker. Helping him are his appointed officers and advisors that organize the rest of the followers into units ready for the Serpent's crusade. There isn't really a need to develop an intelligentsia of some sort. There's no need to make sculptures such as the one showcased in the embassy. It's all about conquest, all about killing, all about military capability. Now, just like with models of feudalism and serfdom, or whatever you want to look at in human history, things rarely stay static, and as the Serpent's Crusade goes on, different individuals in certain positions could have helped form other organizational systems while Jinan stayed at the top. However, once Jinan dies and Jarek Va'ruun comes into power, we know that there is a High Council. It could be at this point that the previous administrators or their descendants formed the High Council, an example of the mentioned systems. There are still officers and advisors, but a successor in this structure often relies on the already established authority and influences of the old guard to secure their position. We can also probably surmise that the influence or authority of Jarek Va'ruun may have been diminished just because he is not Jinan, and we see the obvious split between the followers who become more isolationist, while the other followers who disagree with Jarek's decision to sue for peace become zealots, although they still retain religious solidarity and presumably turn all of their aggression towards external factions like the UC and FC or whoever else. During all this, Jarek and the Old Guard probably still needed help with recovering from the losses of the Serpent's Crusade and to also maintain relations with the other powers in the settled systems. Hence, we have ambassadors, officers, and probably bureaucrats exist under the High Council. Most prominent among them could have been handlers who worked with their agents to procure supplies and such for Va'ruun Kai, as House Va'ruun did not establish a formal trade route. The third chart shows what I speculate to be the government of House Va'ruun is like in the year 2330 after the death of Jarek and the alleged succession of Anasco Va'ruun. By this time, 90 years after the end of the Serpent's Crusade, House Va'ruun has seen to an uptick in culture. There's literature, there's art, there's other roles besides being a soldier. We don't know when exactly a formal religious hierarchy formed, but most likely it was between the ruling periods of Jarek and Anasco, as you wouldn't really need such a structure with the founder of the religion who had seen God itself. By 2330, we have under the High Council a system of priests and priestesses with ranks amongst them, such as Gravids being named a high rank. We have a court that serves as the more political or bureaucratic arm of House Va'ruun. Perhaps they are made up of elites who are promised bureaucrats, military officers, and other figures of importance. Undoubtedly, they probably do have some political pressure they can apply to members of the High Council if the court is separate from the High Council. The basic structure of handlers and agents remain the same as they continue to answer directly to the High Council, as clarified by Tomisar Clattuc and Andreja. We probably see another decrease in the influence and authority of the leader, Anasco Va'ruun, as they are the third ruler, and it is a rather common motif in human history to see this diminishment of authority happen over time. It would also make sense given that the embassy was recalled more than likely during a subtly turbulent transition period. The Zealots at this point are still rampaging throughout the settled systems, but will probably answer to the religion or governmental authority of House Va'ruun, as we discussed earlier in the video, if called upon. Let me know what you guys think about all this. I would love to read your thoughts. But yeah, that's it for this long video. This was a really fun video to make, and the lore is just amazing and fascinating the more I think about it. There's a few elements of the unreliable narrator here and there in the information we discussed in the video, and Bethesda, as we all know, loves utilizing the unreliable narrator, which is great because that is a huge part of what we historians had to sift through when looking back through past lives and events. At the end of the day, I think House Va'ruun is a fascinating faction that we'll probably learn more about in the upcoming Shattered Space DLC for Starfield, if you recall the data mine information discussed earlier, and also the fact that there's simply just not a lot of data in regards to it and its followers. Until then, it's been fun speculating and theorizing various thoughts about House Va'ruun and what may have happened or may be happening. If you like this video, please consider helping me out by subscribing to the channel, giving the video a like, and maybe even telling me what lore you want me to cover next down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, you're all amazing, and see you all out there in the Starfield.